All right, folks. Looks like we're live on YouTube, and we're going to be joined by Mark Anielski here shortly. We're just waiting for him to hop into the Zoom room, so we thought we would get everybody ready for a nice conversation this evening. And it's going to be an interesting one. I'm pretty excited about this. I think I'm getting a text message here from Mark right now. So, nope. All right. Welcome, Takota.
Hey, Rob.
How you doing?
Good. The spring is finally here.
Yeah, no kidding. Things are starting to green up, and
I got my first sunburn already, so I'm pumped about that.
Oh man, I hope it's not as bad as the sunburn you got in Mexico last year.
No, I'm not. I won't peel from this one.
I thought you were going to die of skin cancer from that one.
I still have spots all over my back.
Oh man,
from the burn, but yeah, you were right. The skin is different as you get the sun is a lot different when you get closer to the equator.
Right. Okay. So guys, today we're going to be talking with Mark. Look, he just hopped in, and he looks as dapper as ever. And you can obviously hear me, so that's great. Mark, your microphone's muted. And just to give some context to the conversation today, guys, and I'm going to change it to speaker view so that we're seeing one person at a time. So where do we start here? I mean, both Takota and I kind of live in an echo chamber, and we just constantly talk about permaculture and kind of.
You guys don't get out much, eh? Even
No.
with social distancing.
Yeah, that's making it worse. And so permaculture, one of the kind of main kind of statements is the problem is the solution. And so when we end up in a situation like this, that's kind of the context in which we start to think. And I've been watching all this stuff kind of go down and recognizing that I don't know much about economics, in spite of the fact that it's a super important subject, given the fact that we all work, 40 hours plus a week, trying to make money. We get told to put money into these economies and into these stock markets and various investment vehicles. And then something like this comes along and we just watch our life's work evaporate. And so instead of having another live session with just Takota and myself, we thought we'd invite our friend Mark Anielski, who has written numerous books. And if you had to put the word permaculture beside economics, it would probably sit flatly beside his name. And so we prepared a couple of really hard questions for him tonight, because I know that we're not the only people thinking about these things. And I also know that we've got a lot of fans of Mark's out there on our newsletter. And so I thought this would be a great venue to interview him. So I don't know, Takota, do you want to give any context? And I know you've got the first question there, so. Oh, I think I can't hear you. I'm not sure if you're muted or.
I was muted. There you go.
Right.
Before we jump in, I thought I would just ask Mark a couple questions just about his background for folks that aren't familiar with him. I know, like Mark, at one point, weren't you consulting with the government of Singapore to help them redesign their entire economic system? Did I get that right?
Actually, China. So.
Oh, just a small economy.
A few million.
Just China, yeah.
I was in Singapore last year, but
okay, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, can you give folks a bit of background about the work that you do and why you do it?
Those are tough questions. So I'm an economist, a forester by training as well, and I've got some accounting background. And I spent about 13 years with the Alberta government up to about 1998. So I was forest economist with the province with the Alberta Forest Service, and then I spent my last years in Alberta Treasury or Finance in business planning and performance measurement under Jim Dinning when he was treasurer. Ralph Klein was premier, and after that I went on my own basically and as a consultant, and over the years sort of developed an understanding of the economic system and why we're not measuring progress the way we should be. Bobby Kennedy said, we're not measuring things that make life worthwhile. So it sort of gave me a motivation to think about a new accounting system that would measure well-being and happiness as a basis of economic progress. And I've sort of been pioneering in this field for a long time, as noted, advising China on what they call it in the Chinese language, Xiaokang, which means well-being. Actually, it's a Confucian word. So helping them develop their national Xiaokang, or well-being measurement framework, which is pretty cool. And green GDP as well. That's the other piece I worked on. That was way back in 2003 to 6. So I continue to sort of get called on for advice to different levels of government. And I work now almost exclusively with First Nations on developing their economies of well-being as chief economist with what's called the Indigenomics Institute that my friend Caroline Hilton founded. She's based in Victoria. So that's what I do for fun. I do lots of podcasting and other stuff just to, especially in this time when I think we're in an important place of opportunity. And yes, my view of the world is very much a permaculture view of the world. So I say money must mimic nature. And how are we going to do that? So I know it's a burning question for a lot of us. So.
Really high quality comment just came in here, Takota. Takota, you need to be wearing a big hat.
Why?
I don't know. Anyhow,
I've got one. I can put it on.
No. Let's get into it. That's great.
You got a lot of sun though, Takota.
I do, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna the first question. Rob and I were trying to come up with a list of to questions that we could somehow seem intelligent with regards to standing next to you, Mark. But one of the ones, just out of personal curiosity, that came up right away was, what's the most terrifying conversation you've had in the last couple weeks?
I've had a lot of terrifying conversations. Is this going to be the end of us? Is this the end of the global financial matrix? Is there going to be a consolidation into one global currency and digital kind of, system of, ID chips and all kinds of crazy things? That's all, on a spectrum of crazy conversations, or at least listening to different opinions about what we think is going to happen next, right? But I've had some very exciting conversations too with the Associate Finance Minister's Office of Canada, talking about what do we do in the state when can we table a new budget that focuses on well-being. So that's pretty exciting. And I wish Alberta was in that kind of same mindset, but we're not. I think we're in a bit of an existential crisis with oil, below $20. So we're feeling a lot of hurt, I think. But at the same time, there's massive opportunities for redesigning our global money system, the way we bank, the whole thing. It's just really, I just wake up every morning going, wow, I can't believe this is happening. And this is maybe the time to try something new, a new narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Dakota.
No, you go ahead, Rob.
So I've been spending quite a bit of time kind of trying to buff up on economics in the last few evenings, just again, recognizing my sheer lack of knowledge. And I've actually I ended up watching some videos from Mark Blythe. You must know him, hey?
I don't actually.
Oh,
Mark
okay. Blythe. He's a professor at Brown University.
That explains it. No,
well, he's actually Scottish, so not that really matters. But
I got the only book I keep on my bookshelf from my economics days is Economics for Dummies. And
okay,
that's all you need to know. So
okay, well, I probably should pick a copy of that up because I certainly feel like that. So with all the stuff I've been watching, I mean, every economist has a different take on where this is all going to end, and I'm sure that the decisions that get made in the coming months are going to have a large influence on what happens. I've heard everything from contractionary deflation to hyperinflation, and then the most recent, I got a comment on a video I posted today about hyper stagflation, which actually, now that I think about it, seems like the most reasonable outcome. Where do you sit on that spectrum? And let's maybe actually start at the 101 level. What are those three scenarios? And are there any scenarios we're not considering that are worth having a conversation about?
I'm going to be very disrespectful and say I ignore the whole spectrum because I think it's all mumbo jumbo. First of all, economists, what they don't learn is what money is and where it comes from. So when we talk about inflation, actually, one definition of inflation is an increase in the money supply. So what's happening right now is we're getting helicopter money. They use words like quantitative easing. I just say it's like saying, look, Mom, how easy it was to create money, like magic. So suddenly there's all this money coming into our bank accounts. We just have to fill out an Alberta digital ID, and we get, if we're a small business, we can access some of these funds. Now, the question is, will all that helicopter money in our bank accounts cause future inflation? Well, $2,000 a month isn't going to make you go out and spend a lot, right? So yes, it's remarkable that they were able to create this money out of thin air, which is a study itself in monetary policy. But nobody ever stops to think of where did this money come from, who created it, and when governments have raised these billions of dollars to save us, who did we sell this debt to? That's the big question. And if we didn't create it ourselves for free, which we should be, then we're terrible economists, and we're not paying attention to history, which has taught us that we can create money as a public utility. It's like turning on the tap in your house. That's the way money should flow into and through the economy. So this notion of inflation, as I go back, by definition, is an increase in the money supply. The only way the money supply can increase right now is when banks create loans. Brand new money is created every time you get a mortgage or a student loan. People don't understand that either. 98% of our money is created when banks issue loans. Okay, that's really, really important. That means all money today is debt, which has a future expectation of payment. That means the interest payments on all that debt is embedded in everything we buy and sell, everything. In the US, it's about 50 cents on every dollar Americans are earning pre-COVID. 50 cents. That means half your work week went to pay private corporations interest charges on money they created, which we could have created under our public bank, the Bank of Canada. And in Alberta, we have ATB, which is Alberta Treasury Branch, a public provincial bank. So these are my main messages that I'm trying to get people to think about today. So I'm going to just sort of ignore stagflation, hyperinflation, because they all relate to a misunderstanding of the money system. And this is a global situation I'm talking about. Canada is not unusual. China perhaps is an outlier. They're unique in some respects, but everybody in a way is in the same boat. So that's why I'm saying this is a global existential crisis of confidence in a debt money system, which was inherently unstable and was going to implode anyways.
So then I'm gonna reframe the question, because I don't disagree with you on those things. But in your perfect world, then you are emperor and you can make money as a utility. That's awesome, and I want to hear next about what you're doing to make that a reality. But in the event that you get demoted as the emperor and the money system, they kick the can further down the street, I think from what are pragmatic things from an economic perspective that individuals can do to protect the life energy that they've been working to accumulate over these last years in this broken system going forward?
Well, the dark news is, as we now enter into negative interest territory, that means there's no reason to put your money in the bank. So the whole system, Germany's already negative, we're moving towards negative. So when there's negative interest rates, there's a disincentive to save, and there's an incentive to spend, actually. And so in a way, one could say we're all at risk of losing everything we put aside and saved and invested in the casino, I meant stock market, right? And so the whole thing actually is at risk of complete implosion. So the dark side in me would say, this is a perfect economic opportunity to consolidate more money power into yet fewer hands, issue like a crypto digital global currency called the Libra or whatever you want to call it. and yet the people are continue to be suffering even more. The best case scenario, if I was emperor, if I was the leader of the Catholic Church, if I was the Pope, let's say, and I have written to the Pope about this, by the way, got no response, that I would issue a global debt jubilee. I would cancel all debts, reboot the computer, and we could start in Canada. What does that mean? We actually dictate to the Bank of Canada that we now issue enough money to buy back all the government debt that's outstanding, zero it out. That would save every province billions of dollars in avoided interest costs. Can we do it? Absolutely. We did it. We were doing that before 1974. So between World War II and 74, the Bank of Canada was basically buying any government debt and washing it, just forgiving it. Ancient cultures did this. Every 7 years, the Sumerian culture, the Babylonian culture forgave debts. Every 7 years, debts were completely wiped out. They call it clean slate. We have never practiced that, ever. Probably not since Roman times. So I'm not Nero, I'm not an emperor, but if we practiced it, why did Sumerians understand that was wise? Because they knew that, and from farming or tending the land, that land will produce 3 times what you seed, right? And productivity. Money is just an abstraction. We create it out of nothing, and then we act around it as if we didn't create it. Now, if money was tied directly to the productivity of land, real assets, we could actually have a perfect economic system, like a watershed, where just enough liquidity, notice the language, liquidity, currency, banks, right? All water metaphors, is flowing perfectly through our system. There's never a lack. There's only potentially abundance. So, I'm talking to colleagues around the world about designing these new monetary systems that could be implemented tomorrow. Will they be? That remains to be seen. Only if enough people are aware and they start asking these questions, like I have been my whole life, and saying, why is it the money's always scarce? Can we mimic money? What's the biomimicry of money in nature? Can we act like permaculture in the economy? And I think the answer is, of course we can. It's just a choice, right, that we have to make, and we can construct a new operating system. I've shown it. I can play it on my spreadsheet. I can do all of Canada right now on a spreadsheet and show you exactly how much if I was a finance minister. But I would return the power of the central bank to its original glory, which we lost in 1974 when we handed the power over to the private banks. I know it's kind of tough love messaging, and my message for Alberta is even worse. Like, we suck. We have let our most important public bank, ATB, basically do nothing when it could be right now doing significant good for Albertans.
So, Mark, this is something that we've all chatted about, privately as well, and I'm completely on board. This makes total sense to me, and the idea of using biomimicry to inform, and the patterns of nature to inform not only our economy but every aspect of our lives. But I'm just curious, like, I'm sure you've pitched this idea to people like the finance minister and other people. What do the detractors say? Like, why not take this approach? What are the downsides? What are they afraid of?
Well, there is, those who are reasonably informed. There's actually very few economists I've met who understood the money system. Most say, I don't know anything about it. And I taught in the business school for 10 years. My MBA students didn't know either. And I'm like, how is this possible that the thing that we go to school to do, manage money, make profits, right? We don't even understand the origin of money. Like, that seems impossible. And yet we're kind of like Neo born in the matrix, so we don't know. So we can claim to be ignorant. So, I mean, the conversation that I have had, like, I've had conversation with our Auditor General here. And I said, just from an accounting perspective, the fact that we are not operating with a full balance sheet all of Alberta. You run a business, if you're a farmer, whatever, you have assets on the balance sheet. The assets are collateral grade assets against which you presumably can lend or borrow, right? But Alberta Inc. doesn't have a full balance sheet. What does that mean? We don't actually count the oil sands as an asset. We don't count the liabilities of the oil sands as a liability, or the well sites that are abandoned, right? Or the tailing ponds, or the carbon liability, or the viability of soil. Do you think there's an account of soil productivity in Alberta? No, but we'll count, Roundup sales and all those other things, all those inputs, and we'll say, well, that's good for the economy. So you can't operate a business without a balance sheet. So from a monetary policy perspective, my argument, and some enlightened, I think Mr. Dinning actually understood this at the time, and that if we imagine now operating from a full asset accounting perspective, we're going to create money in relationship to the assets that we want to sustain. We want to sustain roads and bridges and hospitals and buildings, right? And we want to make sure the land is optimum in its yield, right? And healthy. Our watersheds are healthy, right? Our people are happy or relatively happy, and we have mental illness under control. All these things. We can have very sophisticated money system. The fact is that very few people have thought about this stuff because we're so normalized or ignorant. I mean, there's all kinds of excuses, I suppose, but there aren't any now. Like the emperor, basically, like we went to see the wizard, and the Wizard of Oz is that little old shaky man, and it was just a constructed fictional thing, and we all have a heart and a brain and courage. So it's like, so that question is, why can't we move in the direction I'm talking about? Where is the reluctance? And yes, there's vested interest. Believe me, we tried to start public banks in America, and the private bank lobby knows exactly what's at risk. They will lose their golden goose, right? If you return the money creation power back to the people, as Abraham Lincoln said, and Henry Ford once said, if people understood how easy the banks create money, there'd be a revolution tomorrow. That was Henry Ford. So we are a long time living in this matrix. So that only to say that very few economists will ever challenge me because they don't understand the money system. And the few that do, it's like, oh, you're talking about inflation. I said, this is not inflation. I'm not talking about inflation. I'm talking about very sophisticated, precise monetary system, which creates just enough money for our needs and enough for innovation and all the other things we want. We can create as much. Now, the truth is, people don't understand this. China has the system I'm talking about. China's had it since the Qing dynasty was overthrown by the nationalists, because Sun Yat-sen studied Abraham Lincoln's model. Abraham Lincoln won the Civil War because he knew that he could create his own money called greenbacks. They didn't need the bank money. They didn't need the European bankers to debt finance the Civil War. And he lost his life, and China adopts this model. It's unbelievable. What does that mean? China can create its own money because as a sovereign central bank, it can create enough money to build as many office towers as it wants. It can have permaculture if it wants. Has it made some good or bad choices? Absolutely. There's ego, there's all this stuff going on still. But remarkably, China could actually lead us out of this wilderness, which is a fascinating kind of reflection.
Interesting.
So those are really big macro concepts and super powerful. How does it translate? I mean, and we went kind of down that dark path a little bit in terms of like disincentivizing people to save. And so if you take that too far down, you end up with a run on the banks, and that doesn't end in a good scenario. So what's the micro? We've got 120 up to 140 people watching right now, which is amazing. What's the micro action that people can take? I mean, I'm blown away that, and this is kind of a conspiracy theory that I heard, but that the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan took monetary theory out of our education system close to 100 years ago. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm blown away by how important currency is in our day-to-day life, and yet we all know nothing about it.
You know nothing about it. I'll quote a famous economist. You remember John Maynard Keynes, or
Yep.
Mr. Keynes in 1930 wrote a letter. It's called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. It's a stunning letter because he says, I'll paraphrase, usury is a misdemeanor. What do you mean? What's usury? Usury is charging interest on money, making money on money. So yet he said, yet for the next 100 years, we'll have to pretend to ourselves that fair is fair and foul is foul. In other words, we're 10 years away from his prophetic, right, statement, which we will be in a state of, in a sense, usury slavery, debt, money slavery, right? So here we are. And you're right. The Economist this week had a nice little article about what would Mr. Keynes do today? And you'd think they would have quoted the 1930 article. No, they didn't. Which gives you a clue. Why aren't they talking about what could be the most important thing to free all of us from this crazy system? Now, individually, these are challenging times, no question. I mean, the good news, I think, is, can you live with $2,000 in your bank account every month? Probably. We're not spending as much, right? The average Albertan couple were making over $100,000 a year last year. A happy wage is about $40 an hour for two working couples. That's 75 grand a year. That's a happiness salary. That's enough money. The statistics show is just enough to be happy, right? After which it actually levels off and actually goes down. The more money you make, the less happy you are. And so I'm saying, well, how is it that Edmonton couples who are making $109,000 in 2018 can't be happy at $70,000? And of course, the transition is difficult because you got mortgages and all this stuff. The good thing that I'm seeing with COVID, though, is that what is it causing us to do? To rethink our priorities. Like, what is that I really need? You know, yes, I would love to go. I'm supposed to be going to San Francisco next week. We're not going. You know, where am I spending my discretionary income and time? Where are my priorities? Maybe my priorities are help my local baker who's buying Red 5 wheat from Farmer Joe. And they make great bread. And I get to walk there and I get to queue up. The farmers markets are still open. Thank goodness, producing great, beautiful kale and, you know, some of what you're producing, Takota. That's cool. Like, so suddenly we can rethink our, you know, this 100-mile diet idea. So we're going to now think about all the relationships we have with money, but then we want to be cognizant we're supporting each other in some way, even as we're, you know, isolated in social distancing. So I think that's the exciting part for Albertans. And it's a kind of a wake-up call. Yeah, oil is in the tank. Like, oil is pooched, right? We have, but, you know, I just wrote an article for the Edmonton Construction Association. I said, you know, in 2005, oil hit average $15 a barrel. And we survived. $15 a barrel. So we've been here before and we'll get through this. It's not going to be pretty because guess what? We were operating as if oil would continue to be $80 a barrel, and it's not. So there's some really tough love things that, and we've done it before. Albertans are tough. We get through stuff. We lived through a depression. The Alberta Treasury Branch was created in the midst of the Depression, 1930 and 1930s. So we did innovative things back then, and I think that's what my call is. Let's be creative here. Let's not get caught up in a depressing funk.
So on that note, then, I mean, we've got people watching this. These videos that Takota and I have been doing, getting thousands of views over just a couple of days. My concern is that in the convulsion of fear that's being created, that people just kind of lay down and take it without actually thinking a little bit about what is the larger structural issues and the fact that the decisions that are being made on their behalf are going to have cascading implications for my grandkids, maybe. I don't know. With the system staying in its current state, we're just kicking the can down the road, and the fragilities are increasing, and the next time it's going to be worse. So
Yeah, there'll be other viruses, right? This isn't going to be the last one. I mean,
and it doesn't even need to be a virus. It could be any number of systems that break as a result of some systemic fragility.
And I think you nailed it. I think the greater pandemic is fear. It is a greater killer. I mean, I think it killed more seniors, I suspect, in those old age homes.
Yeah.
You imagine never being able to see your family and dying alone. Like, fear can be brutal. And so I think we have to be very careful and I don't want to be flip about this. It's like, fear is a serious contagion.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to stare fear in the face and say, someone said fear stands for false evidence appearing real. Whoever said that, I don't care who said it, but it's if it's true, it's like, what are we looking at? Let's look at this situation and say, what are some alternatives to fear? I mean, I've already leapt over. I'm not grieving anymore. I was like, let's leap into the future. Let's write a new narrative. We get to write this narrative, right? We get to write the Alberta story. We'll look back 5 years later and go, wow, I know exactly what we were talking about on April 29th. So what is the new narrative that is waiting to pierce us, literally, right? Because it's like storyboarding in a movie. Like, we get to write the plot and walk into the plot. I mean, Takota, you've been pioneering permaculture at a large scale. Like, are you kidding me? Look at what happened in Cargill, right? It's like, all of these are signs of a system that was inherently fragile and over efficient. I don't even know the word. Too efficient, right? Too fragile, subject to a catastrophe, just like our debt system. In 2008, that was nothing. That was just a wake-up call. This is going to be more interesting, I would say.
Absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to mention earlier about your comments was about how I asked, like, what do your detractors kind of say? Like why not do this? Because it is so common sense. And you basically replied, well, my detractors are idiots. Like, they don't even know what they're talking about. And it seems insane.
No, I'm kinder than that. Actually, here's the sign here. And you guys are saying, if we get 150 people listening tonight, we launched a little, my friend Anika, who's in London, she's a Pakistani Sufi. So we said, we're going to launch a little YouTube thing like we have here tonight, called What Now? And we're just going to see, we're going to talk to as many economists and people from around the world who know banking and stuff and say, what do we do next? Right? Well, you'll laugh. Like, how many subscribers do we have of today? 68.
Mm-hmm.
How many people watch Joe Rogan or, Brian Rose and London Real? Millions.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that to me is telling. I'm not that I'm famous. It's just like, wow, some of the most interesting conversations are getting only 200 views.
Yeah.
But so they either ignore you or, right? But we're not controversial. We're talking about things like love and stuff. We're not like we're not talking conspiracy or, but it's in a way, it's telling that, you don't get the traction that controversy, of course.
Totally. And I think that's part of the whole, like the 5 stages of grief piece is, there's first ego denial, and then there's anger, and then there's bargaining, and then depression, and then finally acceptance. And at each of those stages, you can get stuck there, and there's all kinds of predators that basically, they make it their business to keep you in those stages. So we've got, the traditional media that's working very hard to keep people in denial. Then we've got, the protesters that are wanting to get people out in the streets and burn down burn the stuff down. And then there's the people that are wanting to, bargain their way out of this. And just like Trump, let's just print a couple trillion more dollars, because that we know that works in the past. And then, there's the people that are just like, they're paralyzed by fear and sadness, and they're just rolling over, and they're going to take their $2,000 and just watch Netflix and eat food and hope the whole thing blows. It's like you can totally see how you mentioned the word grief, and like how you're past that. But this is I feel just an excellent, right now I feel we're being forced to deal with the grief and sadness that we've all been just kind of putting away through whatever stages we've been stuck in. And you're absolutely right. We do need to accept that this is going on right now. And I'm just reminded of a quote from Bill Mollison. It's like, although the problems are increasingly complex, the solutions are embarrassingly simple. It's like,
Sure.
why? So I mean, what you've mentioned, you kind of danced on this idea of like, nobody knows what money is. What is money, Mark? Like, what is the function of money in our society?
Money is an agreement. Money is an agreement to exchange some things, right? For it's just a useful medium of exchange. That's all it is. And you say, well, it's a store of value, all these economic definitions. No, it's just an agreement. Like I'll trade turnips for your wheat. Well, what's the ratio? 5 turnips for 10 pounds of wheat. I don't know. And so money is not evil. It's a very useful tool for exchange, right? In the relationship. The problem becomes who creates the money, because if I'm the emperor, in Britain for 800 years they had something called a tally stick, from William the Conqueror up to 1649 when the Bank of England was founded. It was a wooden stick that the king issued as a form of money. It was like getting a debit card. But if you try to counterfeit, you try to carve your own little oak stick, you get beheaded, right? I didn't mess around. But it was fascinating. And I go to the Bank of England when I was there, and I said, do you have a tally stick? And they said, oh, I think so. We have a big gold brick. It's like, no, I want a tally stick. Oh, yes, I think we do. And I said, do you know, the young curator, do you know what a tally stick is? Do you know the story? And she goes, I don't. Like, how could you not know the story, the most stable time in all of British history, right? And it turns out the biggest fire in the Parliament, you remember the fire of the Parliament in 1850 or 70, was because they burned the tally sticks. They basically gave up using them. So this is a remarkable story. What would the modern tally stick be? Would it be, I can hold up, look at this. You know what this is? This is money. This is wampum. This is seashells from Tahiti. This is what they used on wampum, right? George Washington, the double wampum treaty, seashells sewn onto buckskin, as if seashells represent money. Seashells were the most ancient form of money, originating from the indigenous Taiwanese, who then influenced the Chinese, who adopted coinage. So seashells, why seashells? In Edmonton, seashells were used to exchange for obsidian, for tools. In the River Valley, there was an economy in which exchange occurred using seashells, which came from Aotearoa, from New Zealand, from the Polynesians. These stories, like our indigenous people know these stories, 10,000 years of commerce in Alberta, right? And I didn't know that story until 5 years ago. And it's like, how come we never heard this story? What an incredible economy these people had. And they had elaborate systems of exchange and relationships. And, they all dispersed back on the happy hunting ground, after the geese flew south. Like, they had all kinds of elaborate protocols of respect. And we think that we're so advanced, right? It's like, oh my goodness. So that's the question is, and I could, I always said, I told my friend in Toronto, I said, if Mr. Trudeau set up a new ministry called Happiness, I would like to see you, because she wrote a book about love. I said, would you be the chief love officer for Mr. Trudeau? I love his hair. It's growing out, and it's, he looks really pretty. But I'm as bold to say, look, I'm one phone call from the finance minister. I'm advising now the associate finance minister office, and associate finance minister's title also is the Minister of Middle Class Prosperity. And she has a mandate letter from Trudeau, which talks about well-being and quality of life. What is New Zealand doing? New Zealand tables a well-being budget last year. Iceland with female leadership is looking at well-being as a basis of budgeting. What I said to the Associate Finance Minister is, I think, to be bold, you should institute a well-being based budgeting system and return the power of the Bank of Canada to its original glory. If your bureaucrats are going to resist this, of course they are. That's what they do. They don't like change. But you can't tell me that what existed before 1973 can't be brought back. You cannot say that, because we did it for 20 years and we can do it again. So who will have the courage to lead? Well, let's wait and see.
So I know Coda's got an important question here before we lose track of that topic. What about, I suspect that the reason we don't do this has to do with, deeply ingrained trade deals. And I mean, is this a point where the Canadian government can say, you know what, force majeure, we're moving on. Sorry, guys, time to move on with our lives. Like, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that the reason that this GasLink pipeline is going in is because of deals that Harper made back all these years ago, that basically say that Chinese have, as much rights or maybe even more rights to our resources than Canadians do. And if we don't do it, it creates very, very big problems. So I'm sure there's some of these things going on above the clouds that us peons, I'm speaking about Takota and myself, can't see. And so I wonder if you can just talk a little bit to that. And is there such a thing as force majeure when we start getting into these governmental agreements?
I think Jerry Maguire said that, wasn't it, that scene, like, show me the money, Jerry, show me the money. I'm going to use humor here. Follow the money, just follow the money. You think about trade deals. I've studied this too. Like, all I learned in economics, I just throw it out. That's why the Economics of Dummies is the only book I'll keep. No, the rest is just mumbo jumbo, words that they make up. And so I go back to Adam Smith. I read Wealth of Nations. First of all, he never even defines the word wealth, which in the Old English means conditions of well-being. So, well, that's because Adam Smith was Scottish. He couldn't accept the fact that the English understood what wealth was. And then he talked about trade being, he said, two countries like Portugal and Britain trade one wheat for port wine because one is better. The land is better for producing wheat in Britain than it is in Portugal. Mm-hmm. So why do you trade? You trade in your comparative advantage, which is a natural advantage. What kind of trade deals do we have today? No one stops to think about why Canada has to even trade one bushel of wheat to anybody when we could close our borders, except for coffee beans and bananas. Like, really think about it. You do a material energy flow analysis of this country's flow of materials, and you say, we can't imagine a time when we could be completely self-sufficient. Of course, we have more biocapacity than our ecological footprint, double what our footprint is. I could show you the math. And yet we never have a conversation about what was a business plan for Canada in the first place. Queen Elizabeth I, British East Indian Company, go and conquer Turtle Island, steal the assets. And oh, by the way, we have this central banking system in the city, the Corporation of London, which can use all that collateral grade asset to then enslave the Indigenous people. Literally, it's unbelievable what's happened. And we never have a conversation about, okay, how much oil do we have to trade with anybody from Alberta? Really, when we have 170 years of it in the oil sands, it's not going to go away. And we feel it's so urgent to build another pipeline. So it's no different than the days when we were, harvesting beaver pelts, rushing to build top hats in London. It's a preposterous system that has forgotten what Adam Smith talked about. Now, will we renegotiate these trade deals based on what I'm saying? Highly unlikely, because there's money to be made in these trades. Why is it that China produces probably as much rice, ships it across the ocean as America does? It's insane. It makes no sense at all. It makes sense for those who are doing all the money changing, and but from an ecological perspective, it's crazy. And there again, it's like, in whose interest is it that the money needs to keep changing. And here's another big lesson. Why does the GDP or the economy have to keep growing? Because the debt can never be repaid and it needs to be fed. It has interest charges, and that interest component keeps growing and growing. It becomes a larger and larger part of our lives and our economy. Economists hardly ever look at that. They don't look at how much interest is embedded in your Starbucks coffee. But if you do the math, which is kind of hard because you got to figure out what the average interest rates on all these levels of debts are, and then reverse calculate it, right? It makes your head spin, but it's there. There's an audit trail. And then I say, surely we can come up with a better system, more just system. But again, it's like, in whose interest is it keep the game of musical chairs going?
Exactly. You know, you basically define money as a tool, and you're saying it'd be better if that tool were used to create well-being in whatever aspect that means, but instead it's being used as a tool for, you know, conquest and suffering, actually. And I'm reminded of a funny saying when I used to work in trades, which is it's not the tool, it's the tool using it.
Exactly. It's true, right? I mean, look, if I could tell you, some of my students said, you mean we could just start our own bank right now? I said, sure. Take nothing, a bunch of legal documents. Let's just create a credit union. The three of us could start a credit union tonight. And what all we need is friends who want to borrow from us. And we'll just actually do what the banks do anyways. We'll just create brand new loans. You know, another permaculture farm in Alberta. Sure, here you go. Here's $100,000. Oh, pay me when you can. Don't worry about it. Like, you know, pay me in rutabagas or something. Fine, right? We could actually start that in Alberta tonight. I've said that in front of church congregations. We could just start a trust, you know, an interest-free lending pool where we just share in our bounty. And guess what? We give without expectation, just like the sun gives without expectation. So that's the model. The sun is the model for money. They don't use a fraction of its energy. It doesn't expect a return like humans do. Like, why is it that we expect a return on money that was just created out of thin air in the first place as bookkeeping entries by corporations called banks, which were given a charter basically to be counterfeiters? It's like, it's just outrageous. And so, okay, let's play the game. We can play in that pool too, but I don't want to play in that pool because that's just a dead end street. I want to play big time. I want to play macro national banking policies like England had with the tally stick, right?
So I've got this is a kind of, not really a question, but it's more of a comment from the section here. But it's an interesting one, and I can kind of see the connection. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this. But you know, you've mentioned China. China's using this style of kind of biomimicry for their economic systems. And one of the comments was, "This sounds like communism." And so,
this is democratizing money, baby. This is like, have you ever thought that the money was democratized? I just told you have a monopoly on money creation.
Yeah. You
have predatory capitalism in it writ large. Banks so big that, you know, and I'll exclude the Vatican Bank, which is a whole other interesting issue. But, you know, the fact is China, the other thing that people don't know is China's Communist Party, and believe me, I'm not a big fan of the Communist Party, but I'm a fan of the Chinese people and their 5,000 years of culture. Mm-hmm. Is they have adopted something called ecological civilization. What? This is the longest standing civilization on the planet, and they adopt something called ecological civilization. What does that mean? It means they intend, and this is adopted at the top right level in the Communist Party. And I just told you I was an advisor on Xiaokang, which is a Confucian word, which actually means moderately well-off Chinese or well-being. That's what it actually means. How could China have well-being ecological civilization and a sovereign money system that they create just enough money for whatever they want to do. They want to rule the world. They could, I mean, if they could build aircraft carriers once a week, they would probably quickly overwhelm America if they wanted to, but they don't, because they never have. They've never conquered the world. They've never been hegemonic. They're inward looking. They're the middle kingdom, right? These are really important reflections. They have a Taoist mentality and a Confucian way of governing, even under a communist regime. So the cool thing about China is yes, it could be the model for what I'm talking about. Will it be? I don't know, because I'm not certain that they won't blow it as well. And they were realizing now that they need to keep the farmers on the land. They can't be pushing them into Shanghai and the big cities because they need good stewardship. They are looking at permaculture. They know that they cannot adopt an industrial agriculture model, or they're stuck. So they're stopping for a minute. They're pausing and thinking about that. The other cool thing I've observed when I was there, I said, one day China is going to stop producing stuff for Walmart. Why? Because they have achieved their Shaokang goal. Their Shaokang goal was defined by a targeted GDP per person. Can you imagine if Canada said, we're going to stop growing the economy, or Alberta, at 20,000 GDP per capita. Then we're done. Then we got to worry about distribution and wealth accumulation. We'll figure that out too. In fact, we'll just put you in jail if you make too much money, or we'll just garnish. We'll use negative interest rates on you, claw back the money. But we don't do that, right? We just let people just make millions and become super billionaires. So is China communist? Absolutely. But remember, they have a very ancient Taoist and Confucian culture, which gives me hope that I've always believed that the future of China and the world will be by the Tao, or it will not, if you know what I'm saying. If anyone's read Lao Tzu, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's about harmony. It's about, Taoism is about 8 forms in harmonious circle, balance, like the medicine wheel, not upward sloping demand curves and debt curves, right? So there's the clue. It's right on the wall behind you, like circles. Circles are about harmony, balance. So there's the clue in terms of how we have to rethink our money system and our democracy.
So in a way, I guess, our money system is run by a bunch of cannibals.
Or sociopaths or psychopaths. I mean, I don't even know how to characterize them. All I could say is this, I'm gonna be very bold, is like, I don't know how a lot of these guys go to sleep at night, because when they know, I mean, that's what irks me. It's like, that's why I have to speak so boldly. I can't go to sleep at night knowing that my fellow Albertan neighbor is suffering financial anxiety when it was completely unnecessary. It's so unnecessary and preposterous that it persists. And to say nothing is irresponsible. But to persist in this game of the money game with your corporate license to enslave people is also outrageous. But with respect to them, I think a lot of them don't understand what they're doing either. They actually don't understand that the game eventually ends up in a debt slave system. And that's why, again, the Sumerians were so wise. Every 7 years, do you know that the American debt levels have been doubling since World War II? They double on average every 7.8 years. And it's now 75 trillion, and they just added another 4 trillion on top of that. So it's like, what if America had cleaned their slate every 7 years after World War II? How many Americans would not be in financial angst, right? Or Canadians or Germans, and this is the truth.
So this is kind of dark, but maybe we're all just in a farm. Have you ever considered that?
We're all in a farm?
Yeah. And not an ecological one. And that, I mean, you keep using the word debt slavery, but like,
Well,
maybe these systems are created to basically control the labor pool to specific
absolutely.
ends. Yeah.
The entire thing, you could say the education system is a way of stratifying the elites. I mean, it was introduced in the industrial era, right? Revolution. Why? To stratify the elites from the working class, to use exams to stratify, to test. Who cares? Takota is going to be a great permaculture farmer. Did you know that when you were born? Did your grandparents know that? I don't know. Did you do a vision quest, as a 13-year-old to find out why you're in the planet? You figured it out, right? So the education system's messed up. It's not education means to draw forth what's already inside you, from the Latin. So all these things, like the language, so my point is the language is all messed up. It's all inverted. And you're right, Rob, in a way where I kind of jokingly say to some of my Old Testament scholars, like, who's the Moses in this story? Who's going to lead us out of Egypt? Maybe there's no Moses. Maybe it's Takota. Maybe it's Rob. We have to lead ourselves out. Like, we're not going to wait for some savior.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think, people the chat is just going wild right now. And everybody's like, okay, get to the point. Like, we've been hanging around on this crescendo for long enough. Like, let's give us the solution. And so I don't know what the solution is, but I do think that, by Mark's book.
Look, I wrote this book. This book is the operating manual for where we are today. I wrote it, and I got my royalty check yesterday. I'm like, shit, I only sold like 600 books and 200 in my basement. It's like, what? I wrote this book as an operating manual, right?
I know. I have a question about that book in a second, but to finish my point, there was, fundamentally, when we start looking at how much of our needs are met through this poorly thought out or very well thought out, depending on the place in society you sit, I guess, system that we depend upon to generate income. Like, we are literally watching our supply chains disintegrate. And the ones that aren't disintegrating are being reinforced by Jeff Bezos so that we can send rockets to Mars. And
good. Put them on a one-way ticket. I don't care. Like,
and so the solution, folks, is that at least partially, anyways, is for us to start taking control of some of our supply chains. Start figuring out where your food comes from, where your heat comes from, where your work locally. Ultimately, it is more expensive when compared to these subsidized imported things than using local economies. But this is when these local things actually count. You're basically investing in a form of insurance policy.
Yeah.
So Mark, last time we talked, you were recording an audio version of that book. Where's that at?
I stopped. I got a voice coach and said, you're not joyful enough or something. I said, put a picture of your I don't have a granddaughter. Put a picture of someone in front of you, and then and wave your arms around like you're. Anyway, so I stopped because I'm too busy. I'm not gonna. I'd recorded like 7 chapters. Forget it. I'm gonna take a pause and get a voice coach or something, or have someone else. Maybe Takota can do it when there's spare time. Doesn't matter who reads it. Someone with an awesome radio voice. But that's why I have this beautiful mic, I don't, I'm supposed to really slow my voice down and be like Orson Welles, like lower my voice so I get the baritone, anyways, only I can't keep up. There's so many things happening. But here's the point though, is, my point earlier is there's this book that I read, and this readers or listeners might love this. This is a book about the story of Pythagoras, the man who gave us mathematics, right, from Greece. Well, this story is about this scholar is a Greek scholar and a Jungian scholar, and he reads Pythagoras's Greek diaries, and he finds out that Pythagoras encountered some weird dude from Mongolia. He came to Greece, like literally came through time, and imparted on Pythagoras his wisdom, his understanding from an indigenous perspective, in indigenous Mongolia, his knowledge of mathematics, sacred geometry, But he says something important. Every civilization begins with an ecstasy. An ecstasy. Existami in Latin means to be out of your mind. An explosion of what was. A reminder that every civilization kind of gets lost, right? We get lazy. We give up the thread, the storyline. Every civilization has these kind of cycles of birth, decay, right? And then new birth. So the question then is, what is the narrative that we want to walk into? What story do we want to tell ourselves about Alberta or Canada? Kanata means sacred or peaceful place. It means pure place, Kanata, right? And so there's a beautiful call to return, as my friend Lewis Cardinal said, let's return to harmony, return to the sacredness of the circle, of a relational economy in which there's always enough. The Creator gave us tons. We have so much abundance, and we live in this artificial scarcity, a money scarcity system. Call it a slave system if you want. Very poorly executed, maybe brilliant, and it's amazing how it continues to operate. And no one calls the bluff on the Wizard of Oz. If there even is a Wizard of Oz, it's unbelievable. And so my hope is that some leader, maybe my onus should not be on the leaders. It's on us to start a new conversation. Yeah. And I'm not talking crazy stuff here. I'm talking basic. I'm not throwing anything out. I'm talking about accounting, basic banking, credit unions, whatever you want to look at, how to run how to steward the land as you're doing with permaculture. These are all the tools. We'll put Humpty back together again. We'll figure it out. It won't be easy. The transition is not going to be smooth. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where my hope is. So the more of these conversations, the better.
Absolutely. And that is the guiding philosophy of permaculture, is that basically we are the ones we've been waiting for. And that if you want to change the world, you start in your backyard and you successively work out through the different zones that you have influence over until you fix everything. And yeah. And I think if everybody did just one small thing that was moving towards this idea of well-being, and within permaculture defines well-being as three simple ethics. It's care of people, so that's all their needs for well-being. Care of the earth, and like basically the ecosystem services, the other organisms that we depend upon for our own well-being, that they have their own intrinsic worth, and they have a right to exist and to have pursue their own well-being outside of us. And then the third one is care future. So doing the first two actions in a manner that allows all future organisms the same opportunities that you had or better. The concept of seventh generations.
Yeah.
And again, the way you do that is you start in your backyard. And so one of the things you mentioned a couple things that people could do here tonight, Mark, and one of them was like if three of us got together and we started a credit union. If every person in Alberta got together and created their own kind of bioregional credit union, would that be enough to topple and kind of would that help, or are there problems within?
We don't need to. My point is, we have the biggest public bank in North America called ATB. It has a legislative mandate to provide financial services to Albertans. Do you know the Bank of North Dakota, which started before ATB in 1919, actually lends to the state, interest-free loans to the state, okay? ATB provides financial services like bank accounts and business loans, right, to all of us, which the Bank of North Dakota does not do, but they're the same kind of creature.
Yeah.
I love credit unions, but I say if you have your own public bank and it's backed 100% by the assets of Alberta Inc., mm-hmm. and you don't think creatively about, I'm not saying we just create crazy amounts of money now in this COVID situation irresponsibly, because we need to make sure that whatever we're going to invest in, let's say we create bonds, well-being bonds, green bonds, whatever you want to call them. We're selling debt bonds already to the markets, right? To some anonymous market. I mean, believe me, they can't even tell you who we sold our debt to. It's unbelievable. But imagine if we were creative and say, we're going to have $10 billion of well-being bonds, whatever you want to call them, right? Because we have orphan well sites to clean up. We could actually create lots of employment right now. 1 billion a year for 20 years. We could clean up all the 300,000 wells that are going to be abandoned eventually. And we could put solar panels on some of them and generate, right? Have a revenue stream. We could help First Nations youth develop the skills to do reclamation work. 20 years of work, right? But what do? We let the industry not put aside enough for the liability, and then they go bankrupt. And some of them got loans from ATB. It's like, what? This is crazy. It's totally irresponsible. We could say it was irresponsible, but what do we do now? Like, okay, we'll just let that be. And now we want to create money for permaculture farming, right? How come there's only one of your size in Alberta? It makes no sense. When the evidence is clear, what you're doing is helping literally our inner terrain. This is the other point I want to make, is like, it's not just about this macro, it's inside our gut. You've talked about it. We have leaky gut, we have compromised immune systems. We can change all that pretty quickly just by what we eat. So all these things, these are all asset classes I'm talking about that we could reimagine the role of ATB and our investment management corporation, right? To make strategic investments, create the money ourselves without cost, no interest at all. Because in fact, here's the clue. You don't have to charge interest because you're the bank of Alberta. Do you understand what I'm saying? You only have to recover the operating costs of running the bank, which guess what? Amounts to about 2% of the value of all loans that ATB has. Back in North Dakota, the cost of lending is 0.9%. It's unbelievable that you can create money at less than 1% of the value of the loan and never have to charge interest to ourselves. We were not going to lend to Quebec or Manitoba, not because we don't like them, but we're jurisdictionally constrained. So that's kind of the thing I want to leave people thinking about. And I'm not talking crazy stuff. It's actually possible. I've yet to meet anybody who says it's not possible under the ATB Act if you read it. And believe me, I've sat inside those ministries. I've sat on the audit committee of Alberta. I would ask these questions. Who do we sell our $10 billion of debt to? The market. I said, it's not good enough. If I buy some lamb chops from Takota, my name's on the invoice and so is yours. You know, but this is reality. And it's a sad statement on accountability. Right. But again, the good news is, imagine if we were the Monetary Authority of Alberta. I've told the Associate Finance Minister what I would do right now is I would poll Canadians. I would ask them how they're feeling. How's your financial anxiety today? Your levels of stress? How much joy do you have when you wake up in the morning? Do you feel despair? How about your kids? Do you trust your neighbors? Do you see your neighbors, right? 2,000 Canadians could get surveyed today, and we'd have an amazing kind of assessment of well-being, how people feel, because statistics are full of all kinds of other nonsense, but not feeling questions. And then we could design with rethink the monetary policy of this country.
So
that's the exciting thing for me. And it's all possible if I had the ear just for 2 minutes of the Prime Minister. I'm sure Justin would listen. He might be like tone deaf or something, but maybe his hair is too long. But it's like, no, I'm convinced that there are good people and good leaders that would or could. Now, you'd know right away where the gatekeepers are, right? Why do you think I'm not on CBC National?
Yeah. And so like one of the things, I mean, we're kind of touching on and the kind of conspiratorial nature, not in that the things you're talking about are wild theories, but in the fact that there are people who, like, if you follow the money, there are people who have a vested interest in setting up the system this way and prolonging it this way. And it's basically our consent that keeps the system running. And one of I had this insight, I think it was a year ago, and I mention as often as I can, because everybody's tendency, or a lot of people's tendency when you start talking about these things is, oh, that's just a conspiracy, and there's no way that, there's this people like, the Illuminati or whatever that are controlling the world. And it's like, I don't care about putting a name to it, but like, if you look back at history, our history is littered with examples of a small group of individuals who were psychopaths, whose goal was to take over control of the world. Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan,
Adolf Hitler,
all of these people, the Pol Pot, like their goal was world domination. And the thing they all had in common is they had millions of people that didn't say no.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, like, just as this, I'm saying this to address some of the comments in the chat. Is like, what do we do? Get to the answer. Tell us what we can do. Is say no.
Like, say no. I was told no is the most powerful two letters in the English, language. But I also warn people, because I said, look, I would tell my business students, I taught, I give them one money lecture. I taught corporate ethics, as if there's such a thing, right? And corporate social responsibility. They would laugh. I said, okay, fine. There's no ethics in business, right? It's fine. Let's go drink beer for the rest of the term. I'll give you all an A, right? Don't tell the dean, But it was interesting, because I said, when you start to watch the stuff on the reading list, I said, don't take my word for it, and don't blame me for what you're going to do next. Okay. You could get really angry. You'd be like, I can't believe I've been hoodwinked. I can't believe I'm a slave, and I'm a slave culture. I can't believe these banks get away with murder, right? And you can get crazy. You can start hurling stuff at, whoever. I don't care. The Rothschilds are just a smart family. I don't have any grudge against them. They're just smart. They perpetuate, they've sustained their economic dominance for many years, generations. So don't get mad. Don't think that I'm your savior. I'm not going to lead you out of the wilderness. I can just give you clues about how it works. The crumbs are there. Follow your own research. Be discriminating, discerning. I've just given you clues about how it works. I mean, we can get in the minutiae of they're just simple bookkeeping entries. It's so simple. As Kenneth Galbraith said, the creation of money is so simple, the mind is repelled, he said. Anything so important requires one to follow the rabbit up the magician's sleeve. And they get lost like Alice in Wonderland. And hopefully you come back out the sleeve. But, right? So he gave us a clue. He wrote that book in 1971 on money. And so these voices are worth pondering. And then you study American history. Go study why the Revolutionary War actually happened. Right? Study the history of the Bank of Canada. The tally stick. Just go and study. I'm not talking about revolution. I'm just talking about returning back to what we had. I'm not saying we go back to seashells. Now that we have blockchain and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and all these sophisticated, most of them are the same system, with young guys motivated by the same greed and desire to get rich quick. Not good enough. I want a distributive, democratic money system where we all are making decisions to create the money in sufficient supply for our collective needs. So that, and the experience of, I've talked to some of my Muslim friends who have created these really fantastic kind of sharing circles or money circles in Pakistan amongst the poorest, right? Where people just put money in the pot and whoever needs money can take it out. And there's not even an expectation to repay it. There's no interest charge on it. But Takota, if you need $5,000 today because you had a bad spring, it's there, take it. Rob and I won't complain. You need it now. And in a year or 6 months from now, you'll put it back in. Now, how would that ever happen in Alberta? Like, we're not cultured that way. We're like, don't talk about how much money you make, or your portfolio or anything. So we're already cultured to be distrusting. So we have to actually learn to trust each other again.
There's a great book. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's kind of, again, these are all experiments we could start tonight, tomorrow. The interesting thing is when you get caught emotionally, he was like, well, geez, I don't know if I trust Takota to advance them I'm going to e-transfer you $5,000 tonight. My wife was like, what, are you crazy? Like, who is this guy? He's got some banjos in the background, you know, right? And it comes down to trust. And yet what's happening, I have a friend in Antwerp in Belgium, he's created a money game. He was a pretty wealthy guy, and I interviewed him, and he said, you know, one day I woke up and I realized I didn't have to work. I got all this money, but I was stressed. He says, it's a weird thing. You have all this money, but I was stressed. And then I went, wait a minute, I'm a smart guy. I'm just going to give a lot of this to my family, just going to spread it out. And because I know it's really what I need. I could play video games all my life. That'd be really boring. And so this epiphany happened for him. And it's an extraordinary interview with him. And he said, then I started thinking about the money system. And I said, well, what if money was just like, you know, every morning you wake up and this is how much money you need for the day. So you wake up in the morning, just like manna in heaven, like Moses, right? And it's full of water. But it's not overflowing. If it was overflowing, guess what? There'd be tons on your counter. And there'd be, oh, I can scoop some up and transfer to Dakota because he didn't get enough. So I'll just pour. So he has this kind of image of everyone has, right, a bottle or a bucket. The bucket also has holes in it because it leaks, right? But it always has just enough. And at the end of the day, it's empty. It's done. It's like the man in, right? It's like Moses and the Israelites. It must have freaked them out, eh? Like going to sleep and night going, what are we going to eat tomorrow? And there it was again the next day. You know? And this is kind of the image that I have for the future of money. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's like, what if that was a reality? And we could actually design something like this. And that's what Steph Cooper's in Antwerp has done. But he says the only way people will appreciate that it could work is he's designed a game that people can play. They experience this. It's like a poker game where the chips never run out. If I come around out of chips, Rob just passes me chips because we just want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like the analogy there's what you're trying to get to is like the game we're playing is the well-being game.
Yeah.
So that's really what it's all about. And this is I can't remember when we chatted before, did we talk about Sam Harris's concept of the moral landscape?
Yeah.
And how like that is basically the basis for morality, and the fact that there are like at any one point you can look out around you and you can make decisions based on ethical decisions based upon actions that will move you towards greater well-being and away from suffering. And you can make those decisions based on the things you can see, but there's obviously limitations to how far you can see. But there's also limitations to how high you can go. And so this is what's really exciting to me is like right now we're fighting over crumbs on over this minuscule amounts of growth on a finite planet that is being driven by this debt cycle. When reality, if we switch to understanding of wealth and money to be driven towards well-being, there's actually no limit to how good things could get. Absolutely. Just like in an ecosystem, like your soil just keeps getting better and better, and it gets like the analogies between the insanity of our economic systems and the insanity of agriculture is just
and we see
parallels.
We see that in nature, right? Roots talk to each other underground, like mycelium and aspen groves. Aspens are like, you know, on and on. We have models in nature. Is it dog eat dog? I don't know. It's pretty homeostatic, right? There's relational stuff going on that just behooves us to fully understand. But the truth is, like, I want you to be successful as a permaculture farmer. I want to, you know, drive down the road and shake your hand and buy your beautiful, you know, produce and stuff, because I don't have the energy. I'm going to be an economist. I'm going to stick with my stuff and you stick with your mastery and Rob will stick with his. And somehow it'll be fantastic because, you know, and you won't be overworked and I won't be overworked. So I think to me, that's an exciting, one thing I was going to say is I have been working on a technology. I call it where the notion is, Takota, because you mentioned something important. My desire is that Takota Coen is the happiest person he can be at this point in his life. I feel a responsibility that you are well, that your family's well. I can't take care of all of these 4.3 million Albertans' relationship, but I can make some choices about those I spend my time with. And here's the thing is, like, we all have, the average male in Alberta has 740,000 hours to live from the moment you're born. It's how much hours you have in your hourglass. Okay, so because the average life expectancy is 83 or whatever. What if life was about exchange of only time? Your hour is no more valuable than my hour. But the desire is the hour we just spent, or almost 2 hours here, I can't believe it, 2 hours, I haven't even eaten yet, leaves us feeling hopeful, joyful, right? I could say, you know what? I get an interface dialog box says, how much more hope do you feel tonight? 5%, 1%, 0? You went into negative. You know, wouldn't that be a kind of cool economy where we actually mutually have these smart contracts? We have an exchange of time and we verify, or maybe not, that my feeling of happiness, hope, joy, eating better is actually increased. I've helped my brother. And my blood pressure goes down. When I go see my GP next, right? All my vitals are better. What happened? I was talking to Takota, this wacky, like, permacultural farmer, you know, and then the curiosity is, what does he do? Well, he grows this, has this thing called permaculture. What is that? You know, like, so now we're like, wow, what kind of economy would that be if everything was just on the same kind of time equivalency? And we could create it. So I've written a paper called The Soul Print, which is what's life about, helping each other's souls be the best we can be. Will people play that game? I don't know. Some people are cynical. No, people aren't altruistic. People aren't actually inherently giving or compassionate. And I was like, I disagree. And why not try it? Try this little platform. Time is then money.
Awesome.
Anyway, people want to read it, they can. I've got it, the survey online. I don't publish it because I'd be overwhelmed. Too many people would take the survey.
Awesome. I'm going to check it out. That's
right.
a really good kind of place to, I think, put a capstone on it tonight. Make sure that your tummy is not grumbling too bad. I don't want to lower your well-being this evening. I want to thank you personally, Mark, for sharing some of these insights. And we didn't necessarily get to what every individual should be doing, but we're getting there, and we're going to keep having these conversations. And I think tonight's conversation was really important to help people to diagnose what's actually going on. We can't, Gandhi said it, that the solution is three quarters of the solution is getting the right diagnosis. And we're all flailing around trying to figure out what all of this means. And the reality is none of us really seem to know. I think we're kind of just convulsing at this point. And if we don't stop convulsing and sit back and fully understand how we've gotten here, and you know, with the decisions that have been made, we can't really plot a proper course forward. And the reality is that this comes back to a conversation Takota and I had a couple of weeks ago, which is really identifying sphere of influence and sphere of concern. And so tonight we kind of zoomed out into the macro, and we talked about sphere of concern and why it is the way that it is. And as we continue these conversations on Wednesday night, we're going to keep drilling into solutions and understanding where our sphere of influence actually is. Fundamentally, we all feel this fear. We're going out, we're hoarding. Maybe there's going to be a run on the banks. And all of our leaders are telling us that these are maladaptive behaviors. They're maladaptive behaviors if you're trying to maintain a broken system. The behaviors themselves are fundamentally based upon people trying to maintain well-being when they know that they're being fleeced and that there really isn't enough to go around because the system is fundamentally based on false scarcity. And it's not based upon responding to crises and black swans, which we're currently in the midst of. So for me, the thing I want to leave with tonight is this idea that take this time over the next few months to really, I was saying this today in a podcast, we should all be taking journals and taking photos and understanding how our system that we're all dependent upon right now responds to these convulsive actions. This will be a conversation that's had in 100 years from now. It won't be the Spanish flu. It'll be the great COVID or, epidemic or whatever. We'll be having not millennials, but COVID.
Can I say, notice the
language? Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, Rob?
Go for it. Yeah.
We use the language COVID disease, dis-ease, right?
Right.
We have a disease, and so it meaning hyphenated, right? And we know something's rotten in Denmark, but we don't know what to do about it necessarily. But we know there's an unease, and then there's this kind of like, wow, but I know something better is possible. I just don't know where to turn to. But I think we just turn to each other, and we learn in this time of self-isolation. You become more educated. What a beautiful time. Like, when would you ever think about studying the money system?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, and I like that. There's like, I mean, if really for me, if there's one big takeaway that one of the concepts that the most common question that we're getting in the chat right now is, what do we do? What do we do? Just stop talking about philosophy. Tell us what to do. And the problem is that equation is like, it's like algebra. There's multiple variables. Before you can figure out what to do, you have to isolate some of the other variables before you can solve for that.
Sure.
And in the work that Rob and I teach, in terms of how to make holistic decisions that are ethical, and the goal is obviously well-being here. We break it up into 3 parts, and we've talked about this in previous Q&A sessions that folks can go back at, like the first 2 or 3. We go into more detail, but essentially it starts out by figuring out there's 3 pieces to the puzzle. First, you need to figure out what you want. Then you need to figure out what you have, and then you need to figure out what's right. And when you solve for those 3 problems, then you can figure out what to do. And so this is the first step in the courses that we teach is basically clarify your vision, values, and resources. What do you want? What do you have? What's right? And so I know this seems really philosophical and at a 30,000-foot view, but this is exactly like another quote. I can't remember who said it, but it's there's no right way to do the wrong thing. Everybody gets stuck on action and this head down asset mentality. But the problem is, we've been doing that, and what do we get? We just get our heads so down they end up in our own asses, and we don't go anywhere. And so I think this is a fantastic time for people to sit down, reflect internally, and think about, what does well-being mean to me? And like your concept about, like the striving to ensure that each other's souls are as happy as, I know this sounds super intangible to most people, but this is exactly what we need to be doing right now, Mark. And I really appreciate your message and all the stories that you've told here tonight. So yeah.
One just reflection on your viewers' comments. The common comment is, I think it reveals a lot about how we think. Like we've become accustomed to a leader, right? I don't care who the premier is, right? Please lead us. Please tell us what to do. And we have pretty good rules right now, right? The distancing rules. It's amazing how many new rules have arisen in the last month. So we follow the rules dutifully. But what I sense is that if this live broadcast, if all your 150 viewers were actually on my screen right now, sitting in a circle, by the time we got around the circle, I think all the answers to the questions would become clear. And not everyone's going to contribute, but so I feel a bit, part of me is like sad. And I know this from teaching in Circle in an MBA program in the States. And we started a new modality of teaching, which was sitting in circle. So I'm the professor, but what do I know? I just know what I know, right? But the students have life experience. They come with questions. And by the time we go around a few times, accounting becomes clear, finance becomes clear, right? Because we're speaking now through metaphor, through not from a textbook, but from actual, what are we going to do? What could we do, right? And I think, to me, I hope I know there's only 3 of us on the screen right now, but there's 150 people who are, maybe caught in that desire to have a leader. But I do honestly believe the answers are in the circle. And this is my view of democracy. I asked Preston Manning once, why are the desks in the legislature in rows and that far apart? Because Mark, that the reason the British Parliament, the way you talked, it's like those desks, those seats, actually, there's no desk in the British Parliament, right? Because you just sit. I said, they're exactly 2 sword lengths apart. You stood up, I tried to swipe you with my broadsword, Takota. I would just miss the tip of your sword. And if I stood in place. But he said to answer, I said, do you imagine a day, Mr. Manning, when we could move all those desks into a circle in the legislature and pass the eagle staff or a feather or something, or kitchen spoon? And he said, this is what's amazing. He goes, I don't believe the existing members of our legislature would have the guts to do it, but I think we can. That was pretty amazing, that response. So I just want to leave maybe that thought about how we do democracy and how we'll make decisions going forward.
That's fantastic, Mark. And I think it's a great note to end on. The second most common question in the thread has been, where do people find out more about you? Some of the books that you've mentioned, the articles you've mentioned, where can people go to access all that stuff, Mark?
So, well, I have Anielski.com. I have a rare name, so it's just easy. My last name, Anielski, ANIELSKI.com. I have the book, The Economics of an Economy of Wellbeing. I can never get the title right. I do have a podcast called The Economics of Wellbeing that you can listen to on Apple, Google, whatever, Spotify. And we're, as noted earlier, my friend Anika in Malik in London, we produced a YouTube show called What Now, which is pondering all these big questions that we try to do tonight in 2 hours. So we're building. We've got 25 guests that we've interviewed. We've taken a pause. We're like, whoa, it's so fantastic. There's so many great ideas. And he's like, well, we could have 100 people, but we're going to get exhausted. So it's a fun platform. I invite people to come and listen and increase our viewership and provide, ask comments like you can in YouTube. Because the plan here, which might get you guys both excited, is we now have this vision of literally writing the next Declaration of Independence, which starts with, we find these things self-evident, that all of us are created in the same image of God, which is love. And then we just go on from there. Like, what did you just say? Yeah, we find these things self-evident. Did my American brothers miss that memo from Jefferson that said we find these things self-evident? Because I don't know, I don't find anything evident down there. Or the Magna Carta, which means the Great Charter of Freedom, 810 years old. Right? Cool document. So imagining like fusing an Earth Charter, taking all these documents together and like writing them as if this is just common sense. Like, come on. Now we all commit to it. In our companies, in our lives, in our cities, in our towns, right? So that's what I'm working on this week.
That's amazing, Mark. So I'm gonna just close on one note. This week on Friday, and I put a link into the chat, and I'll put it up one more time here. There is the Calgary Permaculture Guild is hosting a Permi drinks on Zoom. Bring your own beer. Zoom hasn't figured out how to beam it to us yet. And so one of the solutions is getting a community group going. Another solution that we will eventually get to with the Permaculture Calgary group is an alternative parallel currency. So when times like this happen, we're not dealing in a monoculture. Same thing happens in monoculture fields. We've got monoculture dollars right now, and we're all subject to the decisions that people make on our behalf. So come check out the Permaculture Calgary Guild. If you don't have a membership, it's super cheap. It's only like 25 bucks a month or a year, sorry. And we host events like this all the time. Normally we're not socially distanced, but highly recommend you check that out. Link is in the chat window there. And I just want to personally thank Mark. Let's take the 150 people on this channel and get it 650 books and turn it into 800.
Yeah.
Um,
And we'll definitely be chatting with you again soon, Mark. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Takota.
Yeah,
Thanks,
talk to
Mark. Talk soon, man.
Okay.